Good Chodesh Adar 1. Begin, thank God, now 60 days of Adar, double joy. Right, we all know that the basic halachic reason for why we have two Adars is to maintain Pesach in the spring. Right, the Jews, we follow the lunar calendar, and as opposed to the solar calendar. The lunar calendar, of course, is only a month long. It's only 29 and a half days. So 29 and a half times 12 falls short of the 365-day cycle of the sun. So the seasons, which follow the order of the sun, can you hear me now better? You realize I didn't have the mic on me. Okay, the 365, the 12 cycles of 29 and a half days, so 12 cycles of the month, so the moon falls short of the 365-day cycle of the sun. So the seasons, which follow the sun, of course, move at a 365-day cycle, whereas the 12 cycles of the 12 months would fall short of that. So in order to keep the lunar cycle, the 12-month lunar cycle, up to date with the solar cycle, we add a month every couple of years. Out of 7 years, I think it's 4 years out of 7. I think maybe I got that wrong. I don't remember the exact number, but every couple of years we have to add, there's a whole pattern.
Is it 7 times at a 19-year cycle or something?
Maybe it's 7 years out of 19.
Or 6, something like that. I don't remember exactly.
Percentage of times you have to add a month in order to keep the lunar calendar up to date with the solar calendar. And the reason we have to do that is because Torah tells us that Pesach has to be in the spring. And if we didn't add the month, then every year Pesach would be 10 or 11 days earlier than the year before, meaning it would be on the 15th day of Nisan, but the 15th day of Nisan would be earlier in the sun cycle, in the solar cycle, which means earlier in the season cycle by 11 days or so than the year before, making every year Pesach earlier and earlier to the point we'd have Pesach in the middle of winter and then in the middle of summer and then back to the spring again. But because Torah says we have to have Pesach in the spring, we add an extra month every now and again to keep Pesach in the spring. So in the ancient times, and this is why we do the month, this is why it's the month of Adar. In the ancient times, before the fixed calendar, every year at the beginning of Adar or so, the high court would sit down and calculate when Pesach would be, and if Pesach would be too early, they would add a month. So the basic reason why we have two Adars rather than say two Shvats or two Kisleves is because the month preceding the month that Pesach will be in. Pesach is in Nisan. So the month before Adar is the one that we would add to postpone Nisan. That's the basic reason why out of all 12 months we add Adar, because it's closest to Nisan. But of course, we dig deeper, we discover that because Adar is all about joy, if we got to increase a month, why wouldn't we increase the joyous month? Choose some other month, increase Tevis. Let's say Tevis is a month that's not as joyous. Certainly Av or other months that have like major holidays in them would be very complicated to double. Doubling Tishrei with 2 Rosh Hashanahs and 3 Sukkot would be very complicated. So you got to find a month that doesn't have certain.
2 Yom Kippur.
Sorry, 2 Yom Kippurs would be quite something, right? But they could have done like the 2 Shvats, right? 2 months in advance of Pesach, and Shvat doesn't have any holidays, so you wouldn't be doubling any holiday. But they are okay with doubling Purim. Doubling Purim, they're okay with, even though the first Purim is a minor Purim, it's not a major Purim, doesn't have the same sort of status as the second Adar, which is the primary one. But nonetheless, we do have a Purim Katan, a minor Purim as it's called. All to say that the increasing in joy has been doubled. The idea that when we arrive in Adar, we increase in joy has been doubled. And specifically so, of all the months of the year, we choose to double Adar so we get the extra 30 days of joy. So with that, let's get into our Gemara, our Torah learning, which of course is the source of our joy, is Torah. Okay. So it is Rosh Chodesh, which means we started a bit later. So I don't know how far we're able to get, but let's at least conclude the Mishnah. The Mishnah, as we discovered over the last couple of classes, goes through the nature of the people who qualify as Sotah, the nature of the husband, the nature of the wife, their status, their relationship, and so on. That's what we discussed till now. Is she a kohen? Is he a kohen? Is he born of a legit relationship, or is she born of an illegitimate relationship? Is she pregnant? Is she nursing? And so on and so forth. Now, the Mishnah gets to discussing the identity of the person about whom she's been warned. Right? The whole process of the Sotah begins when a husband warns his wife against secluding herself with a certain individual. She defies his warning, continues to seclude herself with that certain person, and we have testimony to that effect, and thus the Sotah proceeding begins. So, what's the nature of this person about whom she's being warned to hang out with? So let's see. Al-Yedei Kol Arayis Mekanim. The Mishnah says he can warn her about all kinds of forbidden relations, meaning to say, it's not simply that the husband can warn his wife not to hang out with some unrelated fellow, John Doe, which would be a forbidden relationship because she is married, and a married woman is not to be intimate with anyone else but her husband. But moreover, he can even warn her against other forbidden relations. People with whom she's forbidden to be intimate, even if they weren't married. Her brother, her father. These are relationships she's not allowed to have, even if she were single. And now that they're married, if there would be reason for such suspect, he can warn her against secluding herself with these people as well. Right? It would just mean, really, that they can't be alone in a closed room. They, of course, can be together. They can be seen together, they can talk together, and so on. But he, in theory, if he has grounds for suspicion, can warn her against being secluded with any of these relationships. Father, brother, uncle, whatever it is. With the exception of the following two people about whom he cannot warn her. With the exception of menakatan, a minor. The verse says that the suspicion is that she is intimate with the man about whom he is warning. A child who is incapable of intimacy doesn't qualify. Right? The Torah states the suspicion is he's worried about her intimacy. If the person is a child and there's no question of intimacy, he's not capable, then she doesn't qualify as a Sotah, or that's not someone about whom he can warn her, because there is no suspicion of intimacy, considering that he is a child. Likewise, umimi she'ena ish, and he cannot warn her against being with someone who's not a man. Rashi tells us that the Gemara is going to identify exactly what this means. He's not a man. And I scanned through the Gemara yesterday, and if I'm reading it correctly, it means to the exclusion of an animal. He cannot warn her not to seclude herself with an animal. I think that's what it was. Where is it? It's later, Chavav. Yeah, let's see. Let's give ourselves 2 seconds and we'll see it.
I think that's what in Steinsalt's edition says that as well.
Oh yeah, so that's the Gemara's, must be the Gemara's conclusion. Right, the Gemara goes through a few options. First, it suggests maybe it's referring to a someone who has some sort of skin disease. the Gemara rejects that, then perhaps maybe it's referring to a slave. The Gemara rejects that. Right? Maybe it's referring to a non-Jew or a slave. The Gemara rejects that. So finally, it gets to the exclusion of an animal. Yeah. Okay. So anyone except for a child and an animal, he can warn her against secluding herself with that person. Good morning. Now, the final teaching in the Mishnah is like this. We get to discussing circumstance in which the Beth Din can interfere in the relationship between the husband and wife. At a time when the husband is incapacitated and incapable of guiding his wife or encouraging his wife in proper behavior, so the Beth Din can step in. Yeah, thank you. Right? Specifically, that the Beth Din can warn the woman against secluding herself with someone that she might be suspect in lieu of the husband's ability to do so. And this is how the Gemara Mishnah phrases it. The Elu and the following are, you have it, Chavdal and Medalef, 24a. You see there's a little chaf line. It says the Elu. Up, above. In the Mishnah, looking at the Gemara, in the Mishnah, higher up. Right? Beginning of the line starts with the Elu. Yeah. So we take this. The Elu and the following are scenarios, Shebez Mekanallah, when the Beth Din, the local court, the local authorities can step in and warn her against secluding herself with someone she is suspect in lieu of the husband. Namely, Mishin Escharish Baila. If the husband has become mute and he can no longer properly communicate, but the circumstances are such that there's an issue of suspicion, and it warrants that she be warned against secluding herself with a certain person. So the Beth Din will step in and do that for the husband. Oy, or nishtata. If the man, God forbid, nishtata literally means he became crazy. Say the man had a nervous breakdown, God forbid, or some sort of other mental health issue that rendered him incapacitated, at least temporarily. And during the time, perhaps she's taking advantage of that and behaving in a manner that's inappropriate, so the Beth Din can step in and warn her against secluding herself with another person. Likewise, or if the husband was now put in jail. I should comment at this point and say that putting someone in jail today has very different connotations than in the past. Today, when we think of someone going to jail, for the most part, we assume that the person is indeed guilty, because thank God we live in a just society. We have checks and balances in our governmental system. And to a large degree, we trust the government that when they put someone in jail, it's because they deserve it. That's just largely how we see it. And that's a good thing. But in history, that was not the case. Most of history, going to jail could be for 1,000 reasons other than some legal proper reason. It could simply be the man was, the local governor was an anti-Semite and decided to throw this guy in jail, as it was plenty of times the case. They outlawed tefillin and the guy wore tefillin, he's in jail now. The guy couldn't pay his rent, so he was thrown in jail now. There could be 1,000 other reasons why he was in jail, many of which did not include any misconduct on the part of the person who's in jail. So when the Mishnah, the Gemara, and so on refer to someone in jail, and we treat him with deference, we have to remember that in historical context, going to jail does not indicate in any way immoral behavior on the part of the person in jail at all, and sometimes to the contrary, political dissonance and whatnot. We don't have to go so far back in history. This is true 60 years ago in Russia, 70s, Sure, that's right. Yeah, like Mary just mentioned, the previous Rebbe. Oh, his grandfather sat in jail because he was caught at it for bringing for 3 years. And that was after his sentence was commuted from 10, for whatever reason. So Anyway, this man who's stuck in jail, another thing I should add is that for the most part, jail doesn't exist as a Torah form of punishment. For the most part, there are certain circumstances in which a person might be held by the court until such date that trial begins, or other such circumstances in which a person might be held by a kind of jail in the court. But jail as a form of punishment does not exist in Torah. It's payment, lashes, or capital punishment. And the Rabbi discusses this in a number of cases. And the reason is rather simple. We see this unfortunately today in the modern jailing system, especially in the States, which is that when you strip a person of their ability to exercise their good, they end up becoming worse. So, there are various different philosophies as to what the reason for jail is at all, or what's the reason for punishment at all. Is it deterrence for others, to stop others from doing things that might end up in jail? It's one reason. And in theory, the reason ought to be for rehabilitation purposes. You put the person into a system where the person is trained to reintegrate into society, trained to live like a person, like a mensch, and then you can let them back out, in theory. But unfortunately, what ends up happening is the person is just secluded, separated from society, and all the negative character traits that led the person down a path of misbehavior ends up being exasperated because the person has no ability to exercise any goodness. So what do we do? Which is why, by the way, Chabad has an institution called Aleph. A number of times people ask me about this. Why does Chabad have this institution called Aleph, which is essentially there to service the spiritual needs of inmates? And the argument is always, these guys are terrible people, they're bad people. Why we offer them spiritual service? And the reason is just this. What good does it do to anybody if this person stuck in jail can't exercise their good? So for 5 years, the person stuck in jail can't exercise any good, and the person comes out and you expect them to behave not properly because you learned his lesson. The person's 5 years stuck without his humanity, right? So if we can offer in jail while they're keeping, let's say the jail is to keep the society safe, so we're taking the bad people off the streets, good. So we're taking them off the streets. But while they're stuck there, are we working to make them better while they're in there? Or are they just stuck off the streets and then they're going to come out and be worse, which is unfortunately often the case. And to this end, that's why there's an institution called Aleph. Specifically, reach out to these people who have a history of immorality and give them a spiritual outlet, give them a path to spiritual growth. And hopefully when they get out, they will not be as bad as they were before. Anyway, all to say that this is another reason why Torah and Jewish law will offer certain not deference, but offer certain leniencies or certain support to those stuck in jail. I mean, the first reason I said is because oftentimes they're not guilty, they're not immoral per se, historically speaking. Today that's not the case again, historically speaking. But reason B is because this person stuck in jail requires more support, not less.
It's sort of like the court steps into the shoes of these particular individuals who can't defend themselves or unable to prosecute on their own, whatever things they could normally do.
That's correct. So this person stuck in jail then, as you just said, Robert, also the Beth Din can step in and warn his wife if she starts behaving in such a manner that warrants a warning not to seclude herself with a certain man. Yeah.
I'm saying, like, in the grander scheme, the purpose of jail is to, let's say, if somebody does a crime, now you're sentenced, let's say, 5 years. We're going to make you feel so miserable every day for 5 years that you never want to come back here.
Right. So there's three general philosophies as to what the point of jail is. Get them off the streets. Someone dangerous, get them off the streets, make society safe. That's option A. Option B is, as you said, deterrence. It's so miserable in here that you never want to do it again to come back. And it's a warning to others, don't do that kind of stuff because it'll end up in here. Deterrence, right? And then option 3 is rehabilitation. Right? Ideally, if you had rehabilitation, you'd have all the other three. You'd have all three, right? Because you took the person off the street. Right? Plus, it's scary to others. You don't want to end up there. And B, you're not going to unleash a citizen who leaves the system worse than he came in.
Right.
So ideally, it would be number 3.
Right. But there is centers.
Rehab centers are very different than jail, depending on what the person's going to rehab for. Right? And actually, often probably tell us more than that about that in Canada, but there's certainly times when the court will order that this guy go to rehab, depending on the sentencing laws in each state or country or whatnot. I imagine in theory that's available, at least in certain cases. At any rate, here we're learning that these three individuals, the person who went deaf, the person who had a nervous breakdown of some sort of mental episode, and the third person, the one who's in jail, who's now incapable of communicating to his wife if she was behaving in a manner that required a warning, so the Beth Din steps in. Now, the question becomes, how forceful is this warning? And how effective is it? Right? Because till now we've been discussing two elements that come about as a result of her, right? If she transgresses the warning, right? The husband warns his wife not to seclude herself with a certain person, and she does. So two things happen. Number one, she has to go through the process of the site of drinking the water. And number two, she forfeits her ketubah. She forfeits her ketubah if she doesn't go through with the drinking, or she turns out to be guilty, right? She forfeits the ketubah. The question is, when the Beth Din warns this woman, how far does it go? Can we drag her to the temple now and make her drink that water? Does she forfeit her? Does she lose her ketubah if she misbehaves? What happens? What are the consequences of her violating the warning of the Beth Din? So says the Mishnah, this wasn't stated that as a result of his warning, or as a result of the Beth Din's warning, if she violates that warning, she gets taken to the court, gets taken to the temple to drink the water. And the reason is because you mentioned this before, the verse states explicitly that the husband brings his wife to the temple to go through with the drinking. And in this case, where the Beth Din does the warning, the husband isn't there present to be bringing her to the temple, as the verse requires. That's what the verse requires, that he bring her to the temple, and there they go through the process, concluding her drinking the Sotah waters. But in this case, where the Beth Din did the warning, we cannot make her drink this water because he's not present to satisfy the verse which states that he must bring her to the court. Ella, rather, so what's the point of the Beth Din's warning? Is lapaisla miksubasa, to make her forfeit her ketubah. In other words, it's all about protecting the husband. The husband's stuck in jail, right? As it explained in the previous classes, the reason why there's a ketubah altogether is to financially bound him to the marriage so he doesn't just divorce her, right? Now, in this case, where she's behaving promiscuously and then they go through divorce, he now has to pay out. That's not fair, right? Or even if we haven't, she hasn't been proven to be intimate with another person, to be unfaithful, but she's certainly behaving promiscuously. So on what grounds can we protect him from losing his ketubah and make him bound to the marriage? Therefore, says the Mishnah, this is why the Beth Din does the warning. When the Beth Din warns her and says, don't seclude yourself with that guy, we see you're behaving this way, don't do that. And then she goes and secludes herself, he's now free from giving her a ketubah. She forfeits the ketubah. So the Beth Din's warning is not strong enough to make her go to the temple to drink the Sotah waters, because that requires the husband's presence. But it is strong enough so that he doesn't have to pay out in the case of divorce, considering her misconduct. Rabbi Yossi says, he's a dissenting view, and says, the Beth Din's warning is strong enough, aflash kaisa. The Beth Din's warning, telling her not to seclude herself with a certain man, and then she goes and violates that warning and does seclude herself. That warning was strong enough so that now we take her to the temple to drink the water. As for the fact that the verse requires that the husband be there, take her to the court, take her to the temple, says Rabbi Yossi, when the husband comes out of jail, Yishakana, then he can give her to drink the waters. So the Beth Din does the warning. She violates the warning. We can't take her now to the temple because the husband's not here. But as soon as the husband gets out of jail, he can rely on the warning given by the Beth Din to take her to the temple. So the original Mishnah's position was the husband has to be there for the entire process. In order for him to take her to the court, to the temple, and to go through the proceeding, he has to be there from the beginning to end. He has to warn her, and then take her, and then she has to violate, and then he got to take her up to the temple. Rabbi Yossi's position is no. He does not have to be there at the moment of the warning. If the Beth Din does the warning for him, he can later, when he comes out of jail, or say when he's healed from his mental episode, or he can now talk again, right? Because that was the other option. Then he can indeed take her to the temple and have her go through the Sotah proceeding, relying on the warning of the Beth Din. So this concludes our Mishnah, and God willing, we will get to the Gemara, which goes through all the scenarios mentioned in the Mishnah, all the various different variables, the nature of the relationship between the two of them, her relation, what's her status, what's his status, is he a kohen, is he a mamzer, is he illegitimate child, are they fully married, they're not fully married, all those details the Gemara is going to go through, and each one going to give his background, more detail, and scriptural analysis for all the laws we learned in the Mishnah for the last few classes. A wonderful day, a good Chodesh.
Good
Rabbi,
Kodesh.
Rabbi, a comment to make, if you don't mind. Is your recorder off?
I can turn it off if you'd like.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to share something with you and my fellow Habura.